Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's topic is Intriguing Tales of India's Winged Wonders, presented by Natural Habitat Expedition Leader Surya Ramachandran. Thank you so much for being here today, Surya. Over to you.
Thank you, Brooke. Hello, everyone. Good to see a whole bunch of people have come in to listen about birds. Usually, we talk about big cats and fancy wildlife here, but I just thought we should speak about birds as importantly also. I'm just going to turn off my camera for the duration of the presentation, and I'll come back on for the question answers. Okay, so when we talk about India, when we talk about the Indian subcontinent, we generally talk about this animal here, the Bengal tiger. Everyone wants to talk about tigers, everyone wants to see tigers. I want to see tigers even though I've seen hundreds of them, and it's a fascination that probably will never end. But at the same time, in India, when we talk about birds, generally we speak about this beautiful bird, the Indian peafowl, also known as the peacock. In fact, it's just the male which is the peacock, and the female is the peahen. So we like to call it peafowl, India's national bird. But the truth of the matter is, there is a whole lot more happening in India than the peafowl. For those who don't know what Indian birds are or what is the whole story of Indian birds, I can definitely tell you it is a lot more than seeing peacocks. Seeing a peafowl in display in the summer months in India is quite a special sight. But unfortunately, it's not a rare bird, and everyone gets their fill of peacocks when they come to India in the summer. But this is what Indian birds are. Indian birds are actually a family of over 1,300 bird species that have been recorded in this country, which is probably why it is also called a subcontinent. It's a very small country, but we have from the high peaks of the world to a very long coastline to deserts to swampland to rainforest to deciduous forests to mangroves to various different habitats. In fact, we none of us look at India like this. We like to look at India like this. This is a better representation of how India actually looks and what it means and why we look at India like this when it talk about bird diversity. You can see the Himalayas to the north, the, the giant rivers flowing across the northern plains and the peninsula to the south, the coastline, the deserts to the west, and the Deccan Plateau in the center. It's a very varied country in terms of the habitats, and that is very good for our bird diversity. This is another view of a map of India which I found somewhere, which was quite interesting because it was an old representation, a 3D view of how it is to come into India for a bird. Imagine a lot of birds actually cross that high barrier. Some of them even fly as high as 8,500 meters above sea level to come over the Himalayas into India from Central Asia. So, how did we even come to the number of 1,320 now? I think 1,320 odd birds in India. I mean, when we started out, people didn't know much about Indian birds. A lot of people knew about the game birds or the pheasants in India because there was a very big fascination about them across the world. They were captured, they were shot, they were stuffed for people's living rooms, but no one really did studies on Indian birds till these gentlemen came into the picture. They started cataloging birds, they started collecting bird specimens from across, sending them to museums, describing them. And at the start, I think there were around 700 birds described by all these people, including the person in the center, Salim Ali, who is considered the father of Indian ornithology. And then, of course, science has gone leaps and bounds ahead ever since the time of Salim Ali. The first book, as you can see to the top left, the Book of Indian Birds by Salim Ali. It was published, I think, in the 1940s. And then now you have, of course, the latest book by the lady on the right, from the US, in fact, Pamela Rasmussen, who was using DNA and feather studies to separate birds and create new families, genus, and describe new species. So it's a very nice cartoon by my friend Rohan. about how she is splitting birds into different species. Uh, it's quite funny. He has a lovely website called Green Humor, and if you ever get a chance, do visit. He's full of some very thoughtful but insanely funny comics. So yes, the Indian birds, the ones that make the list. 1,332 Indian birds and growing. We are still recording new bird species, out of which 79 birds are endemic. So when I say endemic, that means they are found only in India and nowhere else in the world. They don't even migrate out of India to be recorded in other countries. They're specific to certain specific forest patches, certain specific altitudes, and certain specific habitats in India. What a stunning bird, right? The black and orange flycatcher. We get them in our garden, so we don't appreciate them much. But every time we see one in a bright sunlight, we realize what kind of beauty we have just in our front yard. And the next category is 800 resident birds. When I say resident birds, doesn't mean that these birds don't migrate, but they migrate within India. For example, there are birds which do a lot of altitudinal migration between winter and summer. So they go to the higher altitudes in the summer to breed, and then they come down to the lower altitudes in the winter to escape the cold. So they're still migrants, but they're altitudinal migrants. So there are a lot of birds which are resident in India, but not necessarily endemic because they could be found in our neighboring countries like Nepal, Sri Lanka, uh, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and other countries. And of course, a major part of our bird diversity, almost 45% of our birds are migrants and passage migrants. So when we talk about migrants and passage migrants, these are birds which come from different directions into India, into different seasons for different purposes. And sometimes they even go beyond India, just stopping into India for a few days for rest and some feeding, and they move on. And those are the passage migrants. So these are two important categories of migrants that we have in India. And the truth is, amongst all the birds we see migrants, we see birds in breeding plumage, we see birds in non-breeding plumages. But the truth is, some of them actually transform through the year. Like in the US, you might remember, you might know the story of the sage grouse and how it booms in its habitat in summer and puts out its feathers and displays. Like that, in India, we have many birds which don't just migrate but actually change their entire appearance between seasons. Like this stunning firetail sunbird. This bird actually is a, like a yellow and brown bird for almost 9 months of the year, and for the remaining 3 to 4 months it actually transforms into a bird that looks like this. And it's incredible how these birds do it year after year, and that is also part of the annual transformation and not just migration. In this map you can see the various scientifically studied flyways. Like how we use highways, birds use flyways to get from their breeding grounds to their wintering grounds, or from their breeding grounds to the place where they migrate to in the summer or spring. So as you can see, in India, we are part of three distinct flyways which come into our country. Some from the north, some from further east in Siberia, and some go all the way to Africa, some go to the Indian Ocean islands, and some end in just India and Sri Lanka. So these are the flyways that India comes under, and you can actually see the various flyways that you have across the world. In fact, you can see the red circle on the right extreme and the left extreme. That those are birds which migrate from Alaska to parts of India. I've actually seen one of those birds. It's called the gray phalarope or the red phalarope, and that bird actually migrates from Alaska to some Indian Ocean islands. And in the month of March, they stop over in India on their way back to Alaska. And if I ever go to Alaska and see the bird, it'll be strange that I could have seen the same bird or maybe its cousin in India many years ago. So yes, we can talk about numbers, statistics, science. We can talk about all of those things. But the truth of the matter is, there is always a story. I mean, that's what I've come to appreciate about birds. It's not just the beauty, the plumage, the colors, the call. There is also a story, and India is a place of incredible stories, not just of birds and people, of birds and habitats, and of just birds themselves. So one of the stories I want to mention to start with is the story of this beautiful village in Rajasthan, in the unassuming village called Khichan in Rajasthan. So Khichan in Rajasthan is in the middle of the desert. It is really nothing much. It's to look at. It's a pretty dry place. A lot of farmers, a lot of cattle herders. It's a very very simple village in the middle of nowhere. But something exciting is happening here. That is this: an annual congregation of over 80,000 to 100,000 demoiselle cranes happens here in this very football ground that you see in the middle of the village, and has been happening here for the last 40 years. This village, for some reason, many years ago, the villagers decided to give a little bit of the leftover grain to the migrating birds, and these birds have started coming back in greater and greater numbers over the years, creating a spectacle that you cannot believe is happening in front of you. You just get on these terraces of people when you go to the village and have a cup of nice hot chai in the morning. And as the sun rises, you'll start seeing these birds flying from all directions, and they come and land in this field to feed and go back. Remember, all these birds breed in Mongolia. So you can imagine that each and every one of these birds flies over the Himalayas, over 7,000, 8,000 meters, just to get to this village year after year. That is an incredible story. In fact, one of the really interesting parts of the story is that there is one crane here. One of the demoiselle cranes actually has one leg, and that crane has been coming for the last 40 years. You can imagine cranes do live a very long life, and that crane is always the first one to land inside the village. Only after which the rest of the birds have the confidence to land inside the village. And this still goes on. The people of the village still take care of injured birds. They still feed them, and there is a lot of support nowadays also coming in from the tourism industry and from the government to encourage and support this. But all said and done, stories aside, it is an incredible spectacle to witness if you ever are in Rajasthan in the winters. That's how you watch the cranes. You just sit on people's terraces and you watch these cranes fly in, feed in front of you, and then disperse off like clockwork every day from, let's say, mid-November to mid-March. So that is one interesting migration story. But if you think that is the best, the next one is even more fascinating. And the interesting part of the next one is it's one of the passage migration birds. Remember when I talk about passage migration, these are birds which migrate from other parts of the world to other parts of the world, but just stop over in India. So this is the story of the Amur falcon. So the Amur is a region in Far East Russia where these falcons breed, and they spend their winters in Africa, in South and Southeast Africa. That's where they migrate to. And as you can see, they migrate through India. This is a very, very long migration, as you can imagine. So these birds, on their way to Africa, they have chosen this really, really interesting pit stop. So they come to this part of eastern India called Nagaland, where there are these large water bodies surrounded by forests. And what happens here is these birds arrive at a time when the termites emerge annually. I don't know how they figure it out, how they come at the right time, but they come every year when the termites emerge, and they come in such numbers. And they feed there for about a week to 10 days and then continue their journey to Africa. So they fatten themselves up in Nagaland, in and around this lake, and then they carry on to Africa. And this has been happening for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. It's an incredible story. But what has also been happening for hundreds of years is, remember, these are tribal areas in eastern India, and these birds were a major source of protein. They used to be caught with sky nets, like nets which are like 20, 30 meters high. So just put across their between their roosting sites and their feeding sites. So the villagers used to catch them and eat them and sell them. That was happening for the longest time. But this is the kind of scenes that you could have seen. I'm talking about as recent as 10 years ago, before this spectacle was discovered and the world was made aware of it. And then a bunch of conservationists and journalists went in, educated the people, told the world about this migration story, and now it is a major source of income for the local people. They've stopped hunting the falcons. In fact, they've started homestays, and the people have falcon watch where they sit and monitor the falcons year after year, see where they're going, see what is happening to their numbers. Children are part of it. The local schools are part of it. And in fact, even I've gone there and stayed in one of these homestays, and it's quite an incredible experience. You have to imagine that people used to make a lot of money every year when these birds come by hunting them, but now there's not even a thought of that anymore. And that is a power of a community oriented conservation program. And nowadays you see them like this. Imagine every single dot you see on the sky is an Amur falcon. And I'm talking about not like 80,000 to 100,000 like the demoiselle cranes. I'm talking about millions of falcons in one shot in the sky hunting termites. And this happens every year in the month of October and early November. This is how the site is in Nagaland if you time your visit to see this migration spectacle. It's a pretty rough trip. It's not like for everyone, but once you get there, it's absolutely worth it. Okay, we spoke about two migration stories. Now I want to talk about something totally different. It's a mystery even today. We don't know how. This is a story of the rufous woodpecker and how it nests. So the nesting of the rufous woodpecker otherwise behaves like any other woodpecker, pecking trees, looking for things under the bark to eat, and making holes in the bark to find grubs. But it has a very interesting relationship with this ant to the left. The ant is called a pagoda ant, and the pagoda ant is called a pagoda ant because of the pagoda-like structure that it builds. A pagoda is like a layered structure. That's where the ant gets its name from. And this is the nest of the ant that you're seeing. But what is interesting is these woodpeckers actually seek out these active ant nests to lay their eggs inside. And they actually sit inside and use the protection of the ants to raise their young ones. This is how they nest. Can you see the picture to the right? They actually, another cartoon by my friend Rohan, of course. But do you see the picture to the right? The woodpecker is actually inside the ant nest with its chicks. And the most interesting thing is the woodpecker even feeds on the ants while it's nesting there. But the ants never affect the egg or try to sting the woodpecker. We still don't know why that relationship is. I've gone next to the ant nest and I've been stung, so it's nothing that they don't sting anything and everything, but they don't sting the woodpeckers when they nest there. It probably has to do with some protection from other birds, maybe, but it's a very, very interesting relationship between the rufous woodpecker and the pagoda ant. Okay, talking about nesting, talking about migration, we've covered those kind of stories, but there's something even more interesting, but it is in the scale of geological time. When I talk about the scale of geological time, I'm talking about something, a story that has slowly moved forward for thousands of years, not like in our lifetime. But the results can be seen by us if we know where to look. So for that, we move along the western coast of India in the mountain range called the Western Ghats, which is almost 1,600 kilometers long, which is almost like 1,200 miles long. It's a very, very long mountain range along the India's western coast, and it's also one of the top 10 biodiversity hotspots in the world. So this is how the Western Ghats looks. So Western Ghats is basically not very high mountains, but the tops of the mountains are covered in grasslands and the valleys have forests. So these forests are called shola forests or cloud forests, where because they are at a particular altitude. Inside the shola forest, it's like dense, full of biodiversity, always wet mud, lot of streams going. It's like a rainforest, but what is interesting, it's a stunted rainforest because it is on a hill slope. It's not a lowland rainforest like the Amazon, but a high altitude rainforest which is stunted. But what is also interesting about the Western Ghats is it has a few gaps. When I say gaps, it literally has gaps. So there are gaps which are about 10 to 20 miles wide between the mountains, after which the mountains continue again. Okay. So there are mountains, and then there's a 10-mile gap, and then there's mountains again, and then probably there's, so there are about three different gaps in the Western Ghats for all practical purposes. And because of these gaps, there is an interesting thing that has happened. Because of these gaps, there are bird populations on each side of these gaps which have never met each other for thousands of years. So there are birds which are this essentially the same in the mountains, have essentially developed the same way in the mountains, but they've never met the same bird on the other side of the gap. So because of that, this is what has happened. So these three are Sholakhilis. To the left is the Ashambu, to the center is the white belly, to the right is the Nilgiri. They're essentially the same bird, but they have very different calls, and they also have slight differences in beak structure, appearance, and of course the Nilgiri one has developed a rufous belly. But it's essentially the same bird. So this is a very classic example of speciation by geological isolation. What I mean to say is they have become different species over time because of their isolated population in these cloud forests or cloud islands in the mountains. And this is not restricted to just birds, it happens in frogs, snakes, snails, anything that finds it hard to cross the barrier. Birds that can fly across the barrier and animals that can walk across the barrier have the same species on either side, but those that cannot have developed interesting ways of speciation where they, because of the prey they feed on, because of the subtle differences in the forest, differences in the weather conditions, they have different appearance on different sides of the mountain gaps. Similarly, are these birds, laughing thrushes or chilapans, again are now four different species, but essentially the same bird behaving the same way. But it's not just species we find because of isolation or because of close DNA studies. We also finding actually new birds which we didn't know about. For example, this bird, a stunningly beautiful bird from eastern India called the Bugun leokikla, is a bird which was discovered in the late 1990s, a time when we thought we knew all there is to know about bird species in India, and we just had to study ecology and behavior. This bird popped out in the open out of nowhere, a very small population living in a very, very, very small forest habitat in the eastern Himalayas, and it is actually was living in the community forest of a local tribe called the Bugun tribe, which is why it is called the Bugun Lyokikla. And the villagers have, and the tribal community has taken it upon themselves as their responsibility to care and protect the forests and this bird. And it is kind of created this beautiful conservation story with this otherwise hunter-gatherer tribe to protect this bird and its habitat. Probably about 600 to 800 birds are left in that small area, but it is found just there, and it is a very, very recent discovery of a bird in India. Probably the last new species of bird discovered in India, like a totally new bird. When I say that, we are still finding new birds based on isolated populations which have become divergent over time. Another big part of India is our deserts, our Deccan. We have fantastic birds in the Deccan and the deserts of Rajasthan. We have great Indian bustards. We have a whole bunch of birds, but there are always mysteries. Deserts are always places with mysteries. And one such mystery is in this habitat, these rocky hillocks of the Deccan Plateau, a plateau which has volcanic origin in peninsular India. And you can actually see two wolves moving on top of the hillock to the left. So this is a place of hyenas, wolves, foxes, bustards, a whole bunch of different species. But there is one bird here which a lot of people, including me, have been trying to find for many, many years now. The bird was last seen in 2007. So, like how we found a new bird in the late 90s in India, we've actually lost one of our birds in the 2000s. If you can imagine, in the 21st century, we've lost a bird to extinction. Possibly, we don't know. We all still believe there is a small population of this bird out there. But the last reported sighting was in 2007 in the Deccan Plateau, after which this bird hasn't been seen. It could be because of hunting, habitat loss, we don't know. But before we know the reasons, the bird seems to have disappeared. So as much as there are good and positive news coming out, it is also important to remember how fragile the whole story is and how easy it is to lose a bird that was considered a common bird in a large part of India. Over time, it just disappeared and is now probably a mystery, probably gone, I would say, but there is still a little bit of hope that all us Indian birders hold. Again, talking about conservation, this is a very, very interesting story of conservation from India. On the Grand India tour, when you come to India on the Safari Grand India Safari tour, you will go to this park called Kaziranga. Kaziranga is the land of the Indian one-horned rhinoceros. There are over 2,000 of them there. It is one of the most fantastic conservation stories where from absolutely just like 50, 60 rhinos, they protected the park and started, and the rhinos bred, flourished, and now we have over 2,000 to 3,000 rhinos which are being given to other parks and even other countries like Nepal. So this is a huge conservation story. But because of the conservation of the rhino, we are losing out on a critically endangered bird called the Bengal florican, the bird on the right. So the Bengal florican depends on the same habitats as the rhino, the tall grass and the marshland. But the Bengal florican needs tall grass, whereas the forest department burns the grass annually in the month of Feb and March to ensure there is new growth of grass so that the rhinos can feed well during their calving season. So this is what happens every year in March, so that the fresh growth of grasses provides good nutrition for the rhinos during their calving season. But this also destroys the displaying sites and the nesting sites of the Bengal florican. So the Bengal florican requires tall grass to jump up and down and display like this, and also they nest inside these tall grasses. Uh, because of this annual burning, this bird is losing out on its habitat, but the rhino is benefiting from it. So this is one of those conservation conundrums that we need to think about. Like saving a majestic, a large mammal could have effects on other species. Now we know about the birds, so we're talking about it, but there could be lizards, snakes, grasshoppers affected by this process year after year, which we don't even know what is happening to them yet. So yes, bringing back the rhino was fantastic. It is fantastic. It is one of the greatest successes in the planet. But what it's doing to this bird in front of our eyes now is something we need to think about and figure out an alternative solution with. So yes, we've spoken about some highlights out of the 1,332 Indian birds. Uh, the truth of the matter is there is always a story. From the time I was a naturalist, started out as a naturalist in 2010, I've been fascinated by them. I loved watching birds. I loved seeing the same bird doing the same thing every day and how differently it does it, how it fought off a competitor. There's always a story. Whether you're going into the Himalayas, whether you're looking in your front yard, your backyard, whether you're walking down the street, there's always a bird which is doing something interesting. All we need to do is spend some time watching it, observing it, and then the bird story will reveal itself to you. It's not just about how beautiful they are. Like I said, it's about where they come from, what they're doing at the moment, where they will be going next, what are they seeking, what are their problems, how can we help them. Everything is a story when it comes to bird watching. I mean, a lot of people think of birds as they say, oh, it's a bird. What more can we do? I'd like to see a lion or a cheetah. There's just a brown bird. But the truth of the matter is, there is so much more happening when it comes to bird life. All we need to do is take a little bit of a moment to observe them. In fact, there's a lovely podcast. If you ever get a chance, it's on Spotify called There and Back Again. There and Back Again. It's all about migration and how it was discovered and the various stories of migration. I was very inspired after listening to that podcast. And if any of you get the chance, it's about, I think, 40 minutes. Please do listen to it. Talking about amazing migrations, here's the story of the bar-headed goose and the demoiselle crane. You can see 33,000 feet flying over Mount Everest. In fact, there have been reports of them being seen from Boeing aircrafts as they come into India. We spoke about the demoiselle cranes. They also do a very similar migration across the Himalayas. So there is, you when you see these bar-headed geese in India, you wonder, oh, it's just a duck, beautiful goose sitting in a wetland. But what it has done to get there, how many hurdles it has crossed, how many hunters in Central Asia, how many golden eagles that have tried to kill it in flight, all of those stories are incredible in and to put into perspective to understand what it means for the goose to come every winter to that particular wetland or lake and go back to breed year after year after year. We also see visitors in the summer. As you can see, there's cuckoos which come to India in great numbers in the summer to lay their eggs in other birds' nests. Here you can see a small sunbird feeding a giant cuckoo who the sunbird believes is its own chick. It's incredible how they don't see it, but year after year we see migrants in the summer. Nesting stories of cuckoos are incredible, and they happen all over the world, Africa, India, everywhere. And of course, bird watching is not just about science, it's not just about conservation, it's not just about trying to understand the nesting behavior or something as serious as that. It is also just great entertainment. In fact, these pictures I had taken during COVID because literally out of the 2 years we spent in lockdown in India, I spent 2 months with the bird on the left and 2 months with the bird on the right, which is almost 10 to 15% of the 2 years time that I spent in lockdown. And all I did was watch these two birds nesting. So the left is a blue-bearded bee-eater nesting on a hollow on a mud bank of a river, and on the right you can actually see how beautifully well camouflaged the chick is of the crested tree swift. And they build these absolutely weak-looking nests out of lichen, and for some strange reason it doesn't fall off. And we spent almost every day watching what was happening with the chick or what is being brought in as food, and finally till they flew out we were able to watch them. So it was fantastic entertainment, something to do through COVID. And to be honest, I still remember every day that we spent watching these birds from our house. So that's bird watching and bird stories for you. I'd like to say just go out and bird, and there's no better decision you could have taken in your life. Thank you so much. Over to you, Brooke.
Thank you, Surya. Those were such fantastic stories. I definitely learned so much. Yeah, everybody, we're going to take some questions now for the next 10, 15 minutes, however long questions roll through. And remember, you can submit your question in your GoToWebinar control panel. So, yeah, we have some great ones here. I think to begin, could you maybe tell us more of the overall conservation status of birds in India? How are things looking from your perspective as a naturalist?
It is very, very hard to say, to be honest. As a naturalist, it's hard to say. I'll put it that way. Because we see a lot of birds always. We always go to the same places to see the birds. But what is interesting is once in a while we join these bird counts. Like we just go and count a common bird. We just go and count the same birds in the same area. Like one small patch of wetland, we count just to see how many, for example, how many Blythe's reed warblers have come in this winter, or how many leaf birds are nesting in that area. And when you look at numbers like that, when you break it down to such numbers, it's quite alarming. The numbers are actually dropping. And what is being said, even though there could be no change in the habitat or the conditions in India, what is happening, what we are seeing is that the during migration, a lot of birds are losing something as simple as hedgerows. I think the word hedgerows, I think everyone is familiar in the US also with the word hedgerow. These are basically live fences with bushes. So a lot of parts of Central Asia, hedgerows have been replaced by barbed wire fencing. So there a lot of the stopover points for the birds on migration is being lost. So birds are a lot more exposed during migration. So they're probably being hunted by either raptors or by humans or by small cats. But there is seems to be an issue somewhere in migration. We've already lost the Siberian crane population coming to India, but we are seeing it happen more and more to our migrants. Though the difference is not significant yet, but the numbers are constantly dropping, and we know that it's the reason may not be within India, but the reason could be something that's bothering them on their migratory path. So this is something that's alarming. And another big conservation issue we have in India is conserving birds which live in flat land. So it's very easy to conserve mountain habitats because they look like forests, they look grand, and people want to protect them, and it's very hard to develop, number one. But when you look at a grassland or a scrub jungle, which is like flat, easy land to clear with an earth mover, it doesn't take any time. Suddenly there's an airport overnight, or there is a landfill, or there is a new housing colony or an apartment that's come up. It can come up so easily, right? Because grasslands are not considered as forests, unfortunately, in the eye of the government in India. So we lose grasslands really, really fast. And along with that, like the Jordan's cursor we spoke about, we are going to lose a whole bunch of birds which depend on such grasslands. So that is right now the alarming state of birds. Yes, we have positive stories. Yes, we have growing populations of birds, but we also seem to have a big issue with the migratory birds that come into the country and the birds which occupy our grasslands.
Thank you so much for that information. We actually just got an additional question asking to explain a little further, and that is, are hedgerows being replaced since they're harder to maintain than iron fences?
Absolutely, yes. See, we live in a new world of shortcuts now. Everyone wants an easy way out. We have Amazon to get something. We go here in the cities. We don't have to go. We get food delivered to our houses. Why shouldn't a farmer living in Central Asia want to do less work? He has access to better materials now, so he doesn't have to maintain a hedgerow. He can just put a barbed wire fencing. He doesn't have to maintain the hedgerow anymore, and the barbed wire fencing keeps the cattle away just as well. So I don't. And it also ensures that the seed eaters don't have a place to sit outside his farm. So it is just the easy way out. I'm pretty sure the people who are removing hedgerows don't have any criminal intent in their mind. They probably just think the way the people in the city do. They just want an easier way to do things, a one-time solution, and that is what is happening. So a loss of hedgerows. Even in India, we are seeing a lot along the highways. There used to be actually places in India where you used to stop along highways to look for birds along certain patches. We used to know that these patch of black-headed buntings will come and sit here, or this streaked weaver nesting colonies here. They all used to be along hedgerows, along farms, along roads. But now along those roads, either the roads have widened or the fencing system has changed, and because of that, we are not seeing those birds there anymore. So yes, it is a concern. Something as simple as how we do our fences change everything. So it's not just about putting out nest boxes for birds. Hedgerows are not just about shelter. Hedgerows are also great places for food. They usually we make hedgerows out of native vegetation, so there's a lot of butterflies and caterpillars for the birds to feed on. It is a habitat in itself. So in fact, if you look at anthropomorphic habitats, hedgerow is a habitat. Um, it is a habitat for so many species which come under the category of urban wildlife. So losing hedgerows may seem something small in the scale of things, but the impact it has on, uh, uh, let's say a million blight-tree warblers are migrating from Siberia to India, and let's say 30% of the hedgerows between Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, and northern India are gone. Then 30% of the birds don't have anywhere to sit on their way from Siberia to southern India. That is the kind of numbers you need to imagine if you want to comprehend the scale of the problem.
That's very, very good and helpful information. Thanks for explaining that. And kind of a similar topic here, we have a fantastic question going back to the rhino area. Since it has been recognized that there's this habitat issue for the florican, uh, is anything being addressed to help with that, setting aside areas to conserve portions of land that aren't getting burned for the birds, or what is being done to conserve these birds alongside rhinos?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say that the problem has been understood by naturalists, but not necessarily the government or the wildlife department. Our management practices of our national parks are almost the same as what they were in the time of Indian independence in 1947. So we still do the same things. Our structuring of our wildlife services is still the same. The agenda is still the same. Yes, there is progress overall, but otherwise, there are certain things that they do every year that they have been doing for the last 70 years, which they will not change. So it is a lot about dialogue. It's a lot about making them understand. Yes, there are small areas now where burning is not happening anymore. I'm not sure whether it's happening because of the presence of floricans or because they don't feel the need to burn those areas anymore because rhino populations are stable. But yes, eventually, also there is a big another problem that everyone should understand is we used to have rhinos all across eastern India. Now you have rhinos in 800 square kilometers of Kaziranga. If the rhinos don't have good food there, they will walk out of the park, which is now surrounded by 10 million people. So you don't want the rhinos to do that. You want them to stay in the park. So you have to make sure they have good, rich food to eat in the park. So burning, unfortunately, could be a necessity, but it could be done in a more scientific manner. We'll probably get there with conversations over time. But as of now, it is continuing as it is, and we are yet to figure out a solution.
That's fantastic. We're getting lots more questions popping in here. Everybody, we still have lots of time, so feel free to submit your questions. These are fantastic ones coming in here. I think this one is a very apt question. I've received multiple of them.
Okay.
What NatHab trips do you lead, Surya, and where, on which of our trips can people join and see these beautiful birds that you've been talking about?
Oh, like I said, we can see incredible birds in almost every NatHab trip. Not even almost every NatHab trip. So it has nothing to do with the trip. I lead the snow leopard trip and the summer tiger trip for NatHab. Yes, and in that I lead the photo trips and the normal trips. But I kind of always make it a point to uh, get people to look at and observe certain specific behavior of birds. They may not be birders, but it's very hard to ignore something fascinating once you understand or comprehend what's happening in front of you. So it could be something as simple as a display of a peacock, or it could be yellow-footed green pigeons going congregating on a ficus tree and them feeding on half the fruit and the rest of the fruit dropping down to the water and the turtles feeding below them. So once you start looking at things outside the tigers, I'm not saying we don't look for tigers. Please don't avoid my trips. Yes, we do look for tigers, but there is always something happening when the tiger is deciding to stay elusive and or when the snow leopard is deciding to stay elusive. So yes, we do spend a lot of time understanding what birds do. Like for example, in Ladakh, we work at around 3,800 to 4,000 meters to looking for snow leopards. And in those conditions, we want to be in a heated room under thick sheets with a hot water bag and sleep over there, right? In those conditions. But there's this tiny robin accenter or a tiny bird called the twite, which sleeps out in the open at night and is active again in the morning. Why do they not get cold? Why are they not dying of the cold? It's incredible. And there are birds which seek out these small freshwater springs in high altitude areas. And when they say freshwater springs, they are like the warm water coming from below the surface, not the glacial meltwater. So even at 4,000 meters, there are birds which find these small algal streams. Sometimes they could be covered by snow. So they dig them out and find those areas because there are insects which are lying dormant there, waiting for the summer, and they go there to feed on them. And there's actually another bird called the dipper. I'm sure you have a dipper, the American dipper. I've seen in Boulder in the Rockies as well. We have a brown and a white-throated dipper. And what is amazing about these dippers is that they actually swim in icy glacial waters at 4,000 meters. Icy waters. I mean, you can't even dip your finger in there, but they'll be
Wow.
swimming there, and they go and they try to find insects that are semi-frozen in the winter, waiting to emerge in the summer. So they like cling on to the undersides of the rocks inside the streams, because that is the warmest area, because the temperature change is not too much there. So the dippers actually go to the undersides of these rocks and eat these insects, and they come out. And you see them, they'll be swimming through the day, and it doesn't bother them. But if you put a finger in there, you'll feel like shivers running down your spine, because it's like minus 14, minus 15 degrees. But these dippers do it. So yes, we do watch birds wherever we go, and it's quite incredible to watch certain things that they do, going by the conditions they actually live in.
Oh, dippers are so fun with their little dance that they have going on, you know?
And also
Oh,
they do that
yeah.
eye flashing, right? They have like when they close their eye, it actually becomes white. That is how they display. So when they display, it's almost like how we humans wink. I mean, don't get me
Oh
wrong. I'm not
my
a
gosh.
so we don't we I don't go around winking at everyone. Don't get me wrong. But when we want to impress a girl, we wink. So the same way the dippers wink, and but when they wink, once they close their eye, it is actually white. The eyelid is white, so it actually looks like they're flashing white. So it's quite an incredible sight.
Oh, wow. That's a fantastic visual. Thanks for sharing that. It looks like we have some adventurous listeners today that are asking more about that falcon journey. What all does that entail? And if somebody did want to go see the falcon migration, how would they do that?
Oh, in fact, the falcon migration place is very, very close to the rhino place, Kaziranga, which NatHab visits. But unfortunately, in the month of October, the park, the national park is still closed. It opens only in November. So getting to the falcons is not that difficult. Yes, there are some bad roads and long journeys, but it's not very complicated. You fly into an airport, and then you have about like a 6 to 7 hour drive, and then you have to stay in these homestays, because that is what community conservation is about. And though the people there are very different, the food is different, their idea of hospitality is different, but it's all about embracing what they bring to the table and what they're doing for the falcons. And then you go out in the morning before sun up, and you just go sit in a particular place, and then you see falcons come like one, two, three, like that, and then there'll be 100, and then there'll be 500 together, and then be 1,000 together. And that's how they emerge from their roosting sites. It's quite an incredible. So it's not very difficult to do, honestly, but it is not for everyone, because the kind of accommodation and the kind of place you go to and the kind of food that you may or may not like. You don't have a choice of spaghettis and Asian and Mexican. You get what they make in their house. But at the end of it, I enjoy all of that. I'm not saying others won't enjoy it. And you may enjoy all of whatever is being served you there, but it is a sight to behold once you go there. Like end October is like a perfect time, like 25th October to like 10th November. That sweet spot is a great time to go there. It's like from Guwahati airport. Yeah, it's like it's an easy 3 day trip, in and out.
Awesome. Thanks for explaining that. Yeah, and as you were going through your presentation today, it just reminded me of my experience in the Western Ghats. And uh, just similarly, we have some questions in here asking about what parts of India have the highest diversity of birds and why.
Oh yes, we have a very, very good bird diversity in the eastern Himalayas. So eastern Himalayas is basically Bhutan, yes, but either side of Bhutan you have to remember is India again. So east of Bhutan, going into Burma, so that is where the Himalayas meets the Naga Patkai Hills. So there are two mountain ranges that meet over there. And to the north of it is Tibet, and to the south of it is the Brahmaputra Valley, the large river valley. And in this place, we have one of the highest concentrations of birds. I think over 650 species in a very small area. And if you actually do good birding for 10 days, you can actually get over 500 species in that place. And I'm not talking about one obscure warbler after another. I'm talking about some incredibly beautiful birds. You will see one after the other. And it's, yes, some very, very good birding. It's actually one of the top birding spots in the world. Like for people who go to Colombia and Peru, they do come to the eastern Himalayas to do some hardcore birding trips. And I do one every year with a bunch of people. I work with the binocular company Swarovski. So a bunch of people come from Swarovski every year. So we just go exploring different parts of the eastern Himalayas. But yes, we do have very good bird life in the Western Ghats as well. I mean, in our South India book, we covered over 660 species of birds, but that is not in one area. That is across the entire peninsula of India. But if you want to have one hotspot, there's a place called Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary. Eagle Nest. It's in Arunachal Pradesh on the borders of Bhutan and India, and I think that's probably one of the most fascinating places to bird in.
Speaking of the Western Ghats, this is a fun science-y question. We have someone asking if some of the isolated populations of birds, like I think it's the Sholokilus, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Sholakili,
Would,
yes.
yes, yeah, would they interbreed in captivity if they were brought back together, or have they been separated long enough where that wouldn't happen?
Well, their calls are different now. So we know for a fact that they don't attract their mates with the same calls. Uh, but the whole idea of speciation has gone far, far ahead of interbreeding. I don't know how many of you are familiar. Now people are doing speciation based on DNA analysis. Like 4% divergence of DNA is enough to declare a new species. So we are not entirely sure if all the new species we have described in the world will not be able to interbreed with another species which has been split from. For example, the in like let's say just about 20 years ago, we used to say if a thing is a species, if it is not if it is able to mate only with another member of the same group, but is not able to mate with uh, let's say for simple terms another species. But nowadays that's all gone. So for example now, like for example simple thing like geckos and certain birds, they are splitting based on DNA. So little bit of habitat ecology and DNA, but does it mean that they will not mate when they're put together in the cage? I don't think that is something we know for sure. But I do believe they will, as a personal opinion, because the whole concept of speciation has changed. So if you put two very closely related species into captivity, maybe not every pair will mate, but if hypothetically they should be capable of mating with each other and producing offspring. So yes, I do believe that is possible even in the case of these birds.
Well, fantastic. I think that is the last question for the day. So I would like to send it back over to you, Surya, for any closing comments.
Well, I think the closing comment was go out, have fun, and bird. But I'd also like to say that it is wherever you go in the world. It doesn't have to be India, it doesn't have to be with me or Natab. Whether you even go for a morning walk, whether you go for a tour to Antarctica or Chile, or you go for a wine tour in Napa Valley, I don't know. There is always birds, and the easiest thing to carry on any trip, even easier than a camera, is a pair of binoculars. A lot of people, when they get into wildlife holidaying, the first thing they look for is a good camera to buy. I believe the first thing that everyone needs to look for is a good pair of binoculars, not just for bird watching, because it brings clarity to everything that you see, whether it's a mammal, an insect, a bird, a tree, a plant, a flower. So get a good pair of binoculars whenever you travel. We do still get a lot of people coming on wildlife trips in India without a pair of binoculars, and then I'll be handing my note. I'm not saying I don't want to hand my note. That's not the reason I'm saying this. I'm saying this because it is a great value add for any trip, and it automatically makes you enjoy birds, animals, and various other things. So Start your trip by picking out a good pair of binoculars and before you think of your camera. So that will be my closing statement.
That is fantastic advice. I could not agree with you more there, Surya. So thank you so much for taking the time for present to us today. I have lots of positive comments in here. Everyone seemed to love it. But I would also like to thank everyone who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.